Hi, and welcome to The Working World. I'm Keryn Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham. On this week's show, we had Lynn Lee, the APAC Head of Global Mobility for Total Rewards at Mars.
What a treat that was. All pun intended, Jamie.
I was going to say no pun intended, but no, all pun intended. You did well with that.
Oh, wow. Like, she had some amazing insights and some great takeaways for us in that. None the less than a tip around dance moves. Wait for that.
Yep.
And I especially liked her bit around not only authentic leadership, but also recognition as part of that authentic leadership. And she also unpacked for us the Asia Talent Agenda. So if you want more details around that, watch the episode.
Some really, really great takeouts for sure. I think, I love Mars for the chocolates and products prior to this show. I love Mars even more for the corporate mobility program that Lynn's running. It's fantastic. Enjoy the show. Hi, Lynn, and welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me today. It's such an honor to be with you.
Such an honor to have you on.
Yeah, definitely. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Lynn, we're just going to jump straight into the questions because I know everybody's keen to hear your thoughts around global mobility and remote working. I wondered if you could take us through how Mars is managing remote working in response to COVID.
Yeah, I mean, remote working is such a hot topic at Mars at the moment. So if I just look back at 2020, very much of the remote working requests were very much associate driven. So mainly by associates who were stranded in locations or actually having just a personal preference of being in a certain location and not wanting to travel back to where they're supposed to be. And I think coupled with, a corporate travel ban in place, we were also discouraging associates from moving across borders if they can. So our approach has very much been situational. And I think just looking at the landscape, if we look at governments across the world, they have been quite relaxed in terms of immigration and tax implications in the last 6 to 9 months. So our corporate tax team has been quite relaxed. So with these sorts of requests, was looked on a case-by-case basis, very situational.
Sure.
But there were other instances where, the mobility team came forward to help based on requests that we were seeing. And what was interesting was we in situations where we found that there was no alignment in terms of the scope of work and where the associate was physically based out of, it was the line managers who didn't have that tolerance level in the longer term for such arrangements to continue. So, while we provided the advice, but ultimately it was the business who said to associates that, well, maybe we can allow you to work remotely for 3 to 4 months, but in the longer run, if your scope is local, it's really hard to manage a team remotely, in the longer term. But what I see is perhaps more flexibility and maybe more possibilities for roles that are regional or global in nature. And I think this ties in with discussions around future of work, where at Mars, we do have an executive team looking into what their philosophy is going to be like for Mars in the future.
So it's really interesting, Lynn. You're saying that it's sort of changing, I suppose, the way that people look at it from not only a functional but also a cultural level. And you said that governments have sort of been pretty relaxed about it. How's your team been? Has it been like the duck on the water, just working hard to try and figure out these new things, figure out the new cultural direction and figuring out the way you're going to work?
Yeah, it's very much trying to stay afloat, using your analogy of being a duck in the water. So connecting with our advisors, connecting with the business, and it's really about managing expectations at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like, and I think many organizations are like this, that they're still kind of feeling their way through that. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I would be interested, you mentioned it, that started that description around the, I guess the core idea was to try and avoid moving people as much as possible. Was that purely just from a health and safety point of view?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, going back to a corporate travel ban, we do have quite a well-established health and well-being team within Mars, and they really, look at I guess risk assessments, if you like, in terms of travel, reopening of offices. So very much whether we allow associates to travel or return back to work is very much based on that research. But ultimately, it is personal choice in terms of travel. And that's something that, we have to respect associates in terms of their own risk assessments as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you seeing in relation, though, to travel, there being kind of a downward push from leadership around trying to, I guess now that we all have proven that we can work virtually, there being a push to kind of essential travel only, really where it's business needs only, as opposed to probably more prevalent travel which prior to COVID?
Yeah, so today we still have that corporate travel ban, where it is, essential for people to travel for business or even to relocate. That requires a governance approval process that we have in place. So yeah, I believe we have those checks and measures just to ensure that, travel is truly for essential purposes only.
Yeah, fair enough. That's pretty common at the moment.
And as Keryn said, you sort of been learning on the fly like everyone else has through this unprecedented event or unprecedented time. How have you got networks that you tap into? How have you tried to figure it out? I mean, obviously there's lots of people trying to find their own way. How have you personally, got information and help put in best practice or what you think is best practice?
Yeah, I think in times like this, it's so important to lean into networks, whether it's new networks, familiar networks, or creating new networks. So what I've done personally is to continuously expand my network within the organization, but also tapping into networks externally. So for example, in Singapore, I'm part of like an inner circle of mobility professionals where, we can email each other. So pretty much every week there's an email circulating around just to check on, just do a quick pulse survey in terms of what other companies are doing. Because it is a lot of challenge to be navigating through in the last 12 months. And in times like this, we have to lean in on the community for support.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you seen any really good tips come out of that, or that you've witnessed yourself within Mars, that you would, give to leaders around managing staff working remotely in this new normal?
Yeah. So, I think when it comes to managing people, whether it's in person or remotely, there are principles that still continue to apply, things like situational leadership, creating, a culture of open communication, mutual trust and respect. I would say that the areas that I've sort of tried to do more of would be around empathy, flexibility, self-care, and role modeling that. So when I talk about empathy, it's about, dialing up the empathy meter. So with my team, I just make sure that at the start of every team meeting, we just spend some time to just check in on, what's happening in their world. It allows me, provides me a pulse check on energy levels. And that helps me to adjust pace and tone of voice in terms of how to run that team meeting.
Yeah.
And I think, that the other thing around personal connection, it's for me, dialing up on recognition and celebration even more. So I feel that with remote line management, it's even more important to have my team feel a sense of affirmation or validation that they're doing the right thing, celebrating success. So I've also been intentional in terms of sharing with my line manager some of the praise and accolades that my team members have received, so that he's aware that we're doing a good job, in APAC. The piece around flexibility is, just outrightly giving people permission to work flexibly. I guess in this world of asynchronous working, I've also been more intentional in terms of using collaborative tools or platforms to reduce email traffic and to reduce instant chatter. And the last thing about self-care, just using the analogy of the oxygen mask, in order to help others, we have to help ourselves first. So I've been intentional about looking after my own energy levels and trying to role model that as well. So I personally feel more energized in the morning if I go for a workout. So I don't log on immediately. I take some time out, and that means that I log on a little bit later. And it's perfectly fine because work still gets done. It's just a more flexible working arrangement.
You know what? I love that, right? I think that the fact that you're going out and you're leading by example, you're not just saying, hey, take some time, but you're on the emails at 7, you're going, hang on a second, I'm actually stepping back. And you're leaning in while you're stepping back as well. You're still saying it's okay to go and look after yourself first, but you've really embraced the team. Do you think a lot of that's to do with the fact that we're all on Zoom now? I think that when you see people in a face-to-face situation, the energy level's different, right? Like Zoom has that extra layer. So do you think that, obviously given the whole COVID effect, but also the fact that we've moved to an online sort of platform, do you think that's what's really encouraged where you're going?
Yeah, I think, many people suffer from Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important, to take, say, body breaks during the day. So as another example, if I know that it's been really hard to schedule a meeting with someone and they have got back-to-back meetings, what I would suggest to this person before we actually start the call is to offer, do you want to take a 2-minute or 5 body break before we jump in? I think it's just having that appreciation and consideration that people are busy. We're jumping on back-to-back calls. In the past, we had to run from one meeting room to another or kick people out of meeting rooms. But these days, it's really just back-to-back.
At least we used to get some exercise between those meetings.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It just does come thick and fast, doesn't it? You get off one Zoom, you hang up, and then bang, you're into the next one. It's just like and you do 6 of those back to back, and you haven't had time to sort of like actually stop. So I really, really love that. Hey, welcome to the meeting. Do you want a couple of minutes just to take a breath? I think that is it's really, really wonderful.
Well, Lynn, Jamie and I might have a little bit of a tip for you to take away from today if we can reverse the session a little bit. Jamie and I had the pleasure of speaking with Jess Lively, who is a pretty well-renowned self-care, if I can probably brand her as that, professional in the US, on a previous episode of The Working World. And she gave us a really great tip around unpinning yourself when you're on a Zoom call. So don't look at yourself, look at everybody else, because I think it was more like the subconscious energy you put into looking at yourself, making sure you're presenting well, that chews up a lot of energy. So maybe suggest that to your team. Hopefully that'll help their well-being and recharging as well. Yeah,
I think that's a great tip. I'll do it for myself as well. And I'll role model that.
Exactly. Oh, great.
Just another, I suppose a question would be, from your group, I suppose my first question would be, did you have that group prior to going into COVID? So you're sort of, your mobility leaders little cluster, was that already active, or was that was that born of COVID? And I suppose the second half to this question is, do you have any other great tips that you think have come out of that group that you've also implemented with your program and with your team?
Yeah, so the fortunate answer is that these groups existed prior to the pandemic. So it was really easy to tap into those groups. I think what was helpful in those sorts of questions or discussions that were being raised was the insights that I could share with the business in terms of, this is what I'm hearing externally, right? So it was more proactive because these were discussions that were already happening, as opposed to, hang on a second, let me check, with my inner circle in terms of what's happening. So I think there was the benefit of having, these pre-existing groups and live discussions that were unfolding as the pandemic was unfolding as well.
And it does, speaking as a mobility practitioner, it does bring you some level of comfort too, to know that everybody's going on a similar journey and similar trajectory, especially in relation to COVID. But I don't know about what it was like in Singapore, Lynn, but I know in Australia, the community was pretty quiet at the start. There wasn't much circulation of those emails going on. But, you know, when you got into the back half of last year, it certainly did ramp up. And hence one of the reasons why Jamie and I started The Working World was, you know, to kind of help support everybody else who perhaps didn't have a community or didn't have a voice. So, yeah, it's good to hear that Singapore were supporting each other.
Yeah.
I was wondering, though, when it comes to looking forward, what are the future plans that Mars has that you're aware of in relation to remote working? Is it going to be ramped up, do you think, or is there going to be a strong push to return people to the office, or perhaps a blend?
Yeah, so I think if I look at Mars as a company, we are still very much a manufacturing and services based organization. And in that sense, it's, you know, classified as essential services. So for our associates who are on the ground, you know, producing food or attending to animals in our vet hospitals, it's still business as usual. Of course, with the right, you know, health, safety measurements in place. If I think about our office associates, there is a push towards return to work, but in varying degrees, and it's very much dependent on government regulations. So in countries like, say, Singapore and Japan, we have migrated to a hot desking approach. So there has been, you know, there have been efforts to sort of streamline the physical footprint and have associates hot desk. You know, if you want to come into the office, we sort of apply for permission using an app. So these are the two countries that I'm aware of. In other parts of the world, I have not seen or heard about, you know, further reductions in terms of office space. The future around remote work, I think, still remains to be seen because it is tied to the broader project around future of work that's currently being discussed at the enterprise level and what our philosophy is going to be like.
Yeah, I think what we're picking up is there's going to be a certain percentage, and what percentage that is, I'm sort of unclear of, but who actually don't want to return back to the office. I mean, you know, we're finding there's some people who just go, I'm quite happy, I think it's good, I can pop into the office every now and then. How do you think your approach should be to those type of people who just say, look, Lynn, as much as I enjoyed it before, I'm actually loving it. I've moved out to you know, further out from the city or away from the office, and I'm quite happy there. How would you see, you know, Mars approaching those type of people, those conversations?
Yeah, so I think that's going to be, I mean, if I look at it, I'll look at it in terms of, is this person still working domestically, or are they looking at performing that same role internationally, right? The latter conversation is obviously more complex. In terms of the former conversation around domestically working, say, different states within, say, China or the US, I think it depends. I think it really depends on the nature of the role. So, for example, if it's you know, someone in digital or someone in marketing, yeah, you can. It's probably arguable that it's probably won't create too much issue from a team dynamic standpoint. But if this is a sales rep, for example, I think that would be hard for line managers to fathom.
Yeah, definitely not your in on ground people who have to operate. You know,
yeah.
There's no chance for remote for them. But I do think that it is an interesting shift, and I'm interested to think. I mean, you know, there are other companies out there who need to see the employee to think they're working. But I think that, you know, I always have this conversation with people, and I'll definitely ask you the same question now. If you were to say how many productive hours people got in a 9 to 5 day, what do you think that number would be? I mean, taking out lunch and water cooler chats, etc. Do you have any sort of idea of what you think would be, you know, a productive time?
My guess would be 80% productive.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite high, I think.
Sounds like you guys are pretty productive.
I probably second that. I think now with remote working, I'd say what I'm hearing is people are working harder remotely than they probably did when they were in the office.
And that's exactly where I was going with this. I was just thinking, in the office, do you have those distractions? I remember we used to have a girl who would always turn up late, and as she turned up, so everyone was settled down, she'd turn up at 9:30, and then she'd go, hey, who wants a coffee? And it's just like, hang on a second. So people had settled down. She came in late and she's like, I just want to pop out for a coffee. It's like, are you kidding me? So that whole disruption, just was straight away. It was difficult. But yeah, all those disruptions you have in the office as opposed to working from home.
And that time we save running between meetings.
I think there's a strong cultural overlay on that, right? So if there is a culture of trust and accountability, I mean, these days it's asynchronous working, isn't it? And it's less about physical presence, but it's about getting things done, right? And getting things done can be, showing up late, staying up late at night, or taking breaks during the day. And as long as it works for someone, and they deliver what they're supposed to deliver at the end of the day, for a company like Mars, we're totally cool with that.
I think that's spot on, right? I think that's part of the shift now, because I think a lot of companies who have said, okay, I need to see you to be in there, they actually physically haven't had that luxury of someone coming in. So they've had to say, well, how can I assess what these people are doing? How can I make sure that a certain amount of work is achieved? And so I think this is the fascinating part that's going on. It's really made companies or forced companies to sit back and go, okay, how do I measure productivity if it's not a physical period of time that someone sits in the office? So I think that to me is a great thing that COVID's achieved. And the funny thing is, if you can get people who are knocking off their said work in 5 hours or 4 hours, then what do? You say, well, hang on, Keryn, I've knocked off my day. It's 5 hours. Do you say, okay, well, go and enjoy the beach, or go and enjoy the restaurant, or the coffee, or whatever, or time with your kids? It's fascinating to me.
But I mean, look, we're talking about delivery on roles, but I mean, what I think is going to be really the proof in the pudding is around how line managers help staff grow and progress their career. And so, Lynn, I'm wondering what at Mars, and I know talent management is a component of your role as well. I'm wondering whether you can talk to how Mars may be expanding their talent management support in addition to mobility.
So I think it's behaviors they were trying to encourage. So, with remote working, line managers may not have as much face time with their direct reports. And earlier on, I spoke about, recognition, celebration, just being more conscious of that. So some of the behaviors that, in terms of opportunities of dialing up on, is encouraging line managers to have more regular performance conversations with their direct reports. So it's not about waiting for a mid-year review or an annual review to have that conversation, but how might we encourage line managers to have regular conversations throughout the year so that our associates have confidence that they're on the right track, and at the end of the year, there are no surprises in terms of performance evaluation. So those are the sorts of things that I have sort of uncovered as part of my research in terms of talent management and performance management.
Do you think those fundamentals cut across all cultures and all countries? Do you think it's a kind of one size fits all approach, or are you finding that you're needing to customize that depending on which country you're working with or who you're talking to?
Yeah, I think philosophically, that will be, an enterprise-wide approach.
Sure.
But how, line managers have conversations with their direct reports, I think this is where nuances lie. The Western approach versus the Eastern approach. I think it'll be interesting, when we sort of roll out that philosophy or encourage new behaviors. We haven't quite yet delved into what those cultural nuances are and how we might tailor or customize our recommendations. But that's a really good point.
Just as far as the I suppose movement of people, I just want to get your view on. I mean, obviously it's been quite restricted, and corporate travel has been significantly hobbled due to COVID. What do you think it's going to look like when the borders open? When there's people in countries who haven't dealt with COVID particularly well, there's countries that have. Do you think there's going to be this mad rush, like musical chairs? As soon as the music starts again, everyone's up running and swapping countries. How do you see that? Progressing?
Yeah, the funny thing is, based on the moves that we have been managing of late, mobility is picking up already in our organization. So we haven't sort of put a complete stop to moves. I would say that things are on pause at the moment, and we're just waiting for the borders to open so that people can relocate. I think this is especially prevalent for technical roles, like a R&D director or a factory director, where you do need people on the ground with the relevant technical expertise to perform their roles. It's really hard for them to do that remotely. And we don't have local talent to sort of, fill those roles as well. So we have sort of have a backlog right now in terms of, roles that we're just raring to go, or we just need to cross the hurdles of immigration, border control, vaccinations, or quarantine requirements and whatnot.
I'm hearing that from a lot of companies actually, where they've literally have candidates sitting offshore for 6 months. They've signed the offer and they're waiting to go. And it kind of got me thinking about, where is the tipping point for line managers around starting to look within and filling those gaps, either locally or within the organization they currently have, by upskilling? Because, to your point, it is a waiting game, but the problem is we don't have an end in sight. And even the discussions around vaccinations, they seem to be moving towards, there'll be a 2-stage kind of approach. It won't necessarily be, as Jamie said, musical chairs are light, the music's on and off you go, or the music's off and off you go. It'll still be restricted in some aspect. So I wonder whether Mars is looking and considering around internal upskilling and looking internally, or at least locally, for some of their roles, even where perhaps it doesn't already exist as a skill.
So skills and capabilities is an area that we are currently looking to as an organization. It's about, the current framework that we have, it's, maybe 20 years old, and it hasn't really caught up with the times in terms of new skills and capabilities that are required for the future. So it really starts with that. So there is a work stream in place that that we'll look at launching a new skills and capabilities framework as we go live with Workday later this year. So I think that's one way of mapping the skills and capabilities of the existing workforce, once that goes live.
Sure.
And in turn, I think that will help with the overall workforce planning in terms of what do we need currently and what do we need for the future, and then mapping those skills and capabilities to what's available in the market, and then have that more robust matching exercise, if you like.
And it's something that, you communicate to the whole team, so all the staff, and say, hey, look, we're looking internally. We've got this great new program. We're looking to see what your skills are, where you want to go to. Is that something that's communicated company-wide? Does it start at a managerial level? Because I could just imagine if you're just out there to all and sundry saying, hey, we're upskilling and we've got all this thing, you get a flood of inquiries.
Yeah. So from my understanding, in terms of the work stream of skills and capabilities, is that we are also encouraging associates to highlight their own skills.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity for them to say, hey, I'm skilled at digital transformation, or I'm skilled at Power BI. So I think it's going to be introducing this new way of looking at how our internal associates can sort of brand themselves, so that when we sort of post jobs online in future, we can say these are the skills and capabilities that are required, and associates can sort of do that matching to say, oh yeah, these are the skills and capabilities that I have. And I think it helps with career planning as well. So if they know that this is the job that I'm aspiring to, and there is this gap today, what can I do now to build my skills and capabilities so that in 1 or 2 years' time, I have that in order to fill this role that I can confidently apply for in future.
I mean, that works for both the company and the employee, right? Because you know that someone wants to move into that level. You don't have to lose them to go and get the skills or experience elsewhere. You don't lose the corporate memory. You don't have to have the recruitment, the training, etc. It just seems to be so many fantastic benefits. And so would you say that's been accelerated by COVID?
I will be hesitant to respond to that question. I'm not sure, I mean,
sure.
yeah, I suspect, this sort of thinking was pre-pandemic, because it's been a long time coming. I think it's time for us to reinvigorate and bring the outside in terms of best practice of what other companies are doing, how we actually look at talent management. So I think this new approach and framework is the right way to go, but whether or not it was accelerated by the pandemic, I'm not quite sure.
Right. Yeah.
And Lynn, outside of this podcast, we've had some conversations, and you've told us a little bit about Asia Talent Agenda. Wondering whether you can tell us a little bit about your insights in relation to that and what it is.
Yeah. So maybe I can break it up into sort of 2 areas. So I'll talk first about the China Talent Agenda, and then I'll talk about the Asian Talent Agenda. So a couple of years ago, we started off with having a one mass approach to our China talent strategy. And I invited myself to the conversation. So I was part of those sort of workshops. And initially, the area that we thought that we could sort of play in was in the space of early talent. The perception that the business had was it's probably easier to move people who are early in their careers, right? They are young, eager, hungry, unencumbered.
Flexible.
Yeah, flexible, exactly. But what was interesting from those workshops was that you realized that, these early talent in China, they were actually less inclined for an overseas opportunity. And what stemmed from those conversations that we had was that when they looked at their hiring strategy in terms of graduates, they were actually hiring from overseas campuses. So bringing overseas Chinese graduates back home. And these Chinese graduates were, they had their international experience, and now they want to return back to China to work. So for Mars to now offer them, say, an overseas opportunity, they're like, we're not so interested. This is the reason why we came back home in the first place. So I think, the insight was just so interesting, right? I think there was a mismatch in terms of aspirations between the associates and the business. And that prompted, the talent acquisition team to perhaps relook at their sourcing strategy for the graduates. The other interesting aspect that I took away from those discussions was this thing around bringing your true, authentic self to work, your natural self. And early on, we talked a little bit about, the differences between the East and West. And in, multinational companies, it's very much still a Western mindset where we prize attributes like storytelling, personal branding, and those sorts of attributes are not necessarily prevalent in a Chinese or an Asian context. I mean, I think I look at myself as an example. It took me a long time to sort of assimilate to, say, a mass culture where, I have to be good at storytelling. I have to be good at building my own personal brand. I have to be good at networking. So for someone who is, just recently graduated, say, who's in China, I think what I heard from those conversations is there is a preference for these Chinese graduates to bring their natural selves to work. So if they were to join an established company, one of those silicon dragons like Baidu, Alibaba, or Tencent, they just have to join, be their natural selves from day one, and thrive in the environment. So this war for talent between MNCs and locally grown Chinese companies is quite prevalent, because now MNCs like us, we are fighting with very well established brands in China, and these graduates don't have to change anything when they start work from day one.
It's interesting because, I mean, I think one of the most important things when you're thinking about any talent management program or talent acquisition is understanding the why. And your story was amazing then around some of those graduates and the reasons they were moving either internationally or coming back home. Having that fundamental understanding of what drives a candidate or what drives a cohort of candidates at different stages of their career is really vital. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
I agree. I think there's a great insight there, and I suppose taking it a step further, a lot of people who watch our show are obviously from Western cultures. Obviously, there's some Asian cultures there as well. But I suppose, would there be any tips that you could give to these people to say, how do we start to do the East meets West without the fighting? Because like everyone's talking about, we're fighting for talent, we're fighting for terror, we're fighting for. How do we start to embrace this, and how do we collaboratively start to work with the different cultures? How do we blend the two? Because this is not a passing trend. It's not a fad. It is something that is gaining momentum, or has been gaining momentum for a long time. So it'd be great to hear your insights, maybe from where you sort of come from and where you are at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a nice segue to my second point around Asian talent. So last year I did some sort of preliminary groundwork in terms of what are the opportunities to elevate the Asian talent agenda, and through my research and speaking with other companies, is that I think the opportunity here is to move from a deficit mindset to one of appreciative inquiry. So this is more from a corporate point of view. So again, we talked about skills and capabilities, and very often in organizations, when we look at development plans, it's about minding the gap, right? Yeah. So this is where you need development because there is a gap. Instead, I think if we can balance that with, there is a gap, yes, but however, these are the strengths that people have, and if we can appreciate those strengths. So again, using the Asian talent agenda as an example, maybe Asian talent are generally not so good with storytelling. However, they're really good at execution, and that's especially important in a VUCA environment. And I think I think there's an opportunity to change the narrative in organizations, to say that there are nuances, in emerging markets like Asia, and therefore these skills in terms of execution are actually even more important. Not to say that storytelling is not important, but there's some, just to be conscious that there are these nuances. I think going back to Keryn's point earlier, that it's really hard to have this one size fits all approach, right? I think we need to be agile, flexible, as we adapt to this new future of work.
Absolutely. And I wondered whether you might be able to touch on, I guess, your sector kind of as a whole, and how that may have been impacted from a more of a global policy, not necessarily just global mobility, but a global policy reform or review at a kind of more of an organizational level. Have you seen any changes and what they are?
Yeah. So for consumer goods, essential services, I think if we compare ourselves to other industries like hospitality, I don't think we were as impacted. But the things that have probably changed are consumer habits or behaviors. So things around consumption, right? So when you buy a bar of chocolate, it's pretty much an impulse buy. So if you're not going to the cinema, if you're not traveling, not on a plane or a train, the propensity to buy chocolate, for example, or gum is not as prevalent. So in that sense, that has created some challenges, for that category in the last year or so. So I think in terms of re-looking at strategy, the business is definitely looking at alternative ways or route to market. And I have seen some innovation as well. I mean, last year when, Halloween wasn't canceled, Halloween was virtual. So in the US, it wasn't about trick or treat, going to physical houses, but what the team in the US did was to, create a virtual Halloween experience. So here's a barcode, scan the barcode, and you can redeem some chocolate at a store. So I think it's re-looking at the business model, but it's also looking at, what other ways can we innovate and maybe reinvigorate the category.
I actually hadn't thought about Halloween, and it's such a good point. But I don't know about in Singapore or what your awareness is about the countries, but I can tell you in Australia that the ownership of pets through COVID has gone through the roof.
Yes.
The price of dogs have gone through the roof, and obviously people purchasing cats. And it's been this whole, I don't know if that's been an uptick for you, but maybe where you fell down on Halloween, you're certainly picking up on pet food sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for our pet business is thriving. It's growing, double-digit growth. Pets are part of the family. And, in the pandemic where, we were stocking up on food for ourselves, pet parents were in turn stocking up on food for their own pets. And I think there is an even faster acceleration towards digital commerce. So I think the opportunity or the uptake that we've seen is around, pet parents purchasing food online, and that subscription model is just so powerful, right? Because once you start, it's like every month you get this bag of food, and it's just an automatic purchasing behavior. So one of the reasons why the pet business is doing well too.
Yeah, we got the same thing at home with boxes of toilet paper. I mean, we were doing it before COVID, and now we're doing it, sort of during COVID. But there's a company in Australia called Who Gives a Crap, and basically they deliver this whole box of toilet paper every month, so it comes to the door. And funny enough, I remember, I don't know if you saw the media, but people seem to go mad for toilet paper, although they didn't realise that COVID didn't give them gastro. And there was toilet paper shortages, and we actually got to the point where we were giving it out to people because
right.
I think that the delivery at the door is great. I think having that automatic sort of renewal is good. I don't know if you do it with the chocolate fetishes, because I can tell you I still have my I'm like, it's not just an impulse buy, it's like I go there to buy the chocolate. Right? I'm like, I need that chocolate. It's just a self-autopilot.
I know. I was kind of wondering when you were talking, Lynn, about whether they did any market checking on Australia, because there was certainly some deliberate buying, especially in Melbourne during our 100 and whatever day lockdown that we had. Because supermarkets were still open, so there was definitely deliberate eating on our account. So we held up the economy
customers like you.
Just Melbourne.
I've just purchased a drone, like this really amazing, sort of DJI Mavic drone that you can fly everywhere. I just wonder if they ever get a day where you could be delivering chocolate bars. There you go. There's your next
business idea. Yeah.
Exactly. There was one thing I was going to ask you, which is, it's quite interesting. So, as a supplier, so as a services supplier, and I know lots of other different suppliers. It's interesting. We see a lot of big companies who go, okay, let's be really mindful of our own internal staff and the way we're treating people. And then they'll go to the external supplier. Look, I need this by tomorrow. And it's. I don't know what you think of that. If there's it just seems to be this disconnect that I've been noticing. I noticed that there's supplier bullying that I've got feedback in the industry of colleagues, of people who sit and say, okay, well let's practice care of all of our team.
Yeah.
But actually reflecting it out, no, I need this tomorrow, and the pressure's right on. I don't know what your thoughts on that, if you've noticed it.
So I think there's the word that I would use is mutuality. And it's a principle that we have at Mars. We have 5 principles, and one of the principles is mutuality. So it's actually ingrained in us that, you know, we as much as mutuality applies internally, it also applies to how we work with our customers. So yeah, so say for me, when I am working, or my team, when we are working with our vendors, you know, is to check in terms of timelines, right? What makes sense? Is this reasonable? You know, it's not just insisting that we push the envelope all the time, but having a mutual understanding in terms of, okay, you know, how much can we really push? You know, and I think it starts with you know, having our suppliers understand how we work, our ways of working, our preferences, and once we sort of establish those baseline principles, it just helps everyone operate in the same way, because we have that understanding.
I loved you before for your chocolate. Now I love you for your mutuality. I just think it's fantastic. No, that's great. It was just a question that, as I said, I've sort of had bounce around in my head for a while, and it's interesting to get your perspective.
I thought about this analogy of dancing to talk about attributes that would be valuable in the future. So the 2 attributes I thought about was, you know, being bold and courageous. You know, with the pandemic, I think what I've heard from other companies is that global mobility played a crucible part in navigating complexity, and that, you know, provided that seat at the table. So then my invitation to a global mobility practitioner for the future is, you know, just get on the dance floor. You know, don't wait for an invitation to be invited to the dance. Just dance.
Love it.
and the other part was around, you know, having a flexible and agile mindset. You know, taking the opportunity to upskill, being able to deal with ambiguity, because I think that's going to be ever present in this VUCA world that we operate in. So then, you know, using the analogy of dancing is pick up some new dance skills, you know, show off your new dance moves.
If you ever come to Melbourne, I'll come for a boogie with you. How does that sound?
I love that.
I love the boogie dance. I think you're in a good
Fantastic.
spot.
Thanks, Lynn. That's a really good one.
Love it. Okay, Lynn, great to meet you.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really insightful. Really enjoyed hearing about what goes on at Mars and in your sector, and certainly from an Asia-Pac and Singapore view. It's been a delight. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me again.